listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Guess what? It's time for the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. ODYSY1.com if you're not there already. You can see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio, and of course find out all the different locations where you can listen to this show. And we're also simulcasting in video over on my YouTube channel. And the best part about the YouTube channel is, of course, the live chat room going on right now. You can come on over and join everyone. And that's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And by the way, there are nearly 300 archived episodes of the Intrepid radio program as broadcast on Odyssey and my YouTube page. On my YouTube page, go down underneath the video and you're going to see off the main page the Intrepid radio link. And you go in there, there's almost 300 episodes to listen to in archive. Now, of course, for those of you new to the show, we range in topic from the historical to the spiritual, to the metaphysical, to the mysterious, to the paranormal, and back around to the historical. And every now and then we give you a dash of civics and also a little bit of politics now and then. Although politicking, I don't like to do that as much as I like to present current events as they're happening. And there's a lot of current events now, and there's things that I grow very tired of seeing. Just this morning, the very first thing, I'll get up in the morning and I make my coffee and I go out on the patio, even though it's starting to get colder already up here. And I take a look at what's going on. And just scrolling through, go to Facebook and scroll through your friends' posts that come up that you're following. Everything is politics. Everything, and by politics, I mean not just current events. It is opining on the current events. It's everything from the left whining and whinging about the president and what an awful guy he is, and because it's all they've got. And it's the right whining and whinging about the left, whining and whinging about the president. And it's ongoing, and the COVID stuff is ongoing every time, and I've said this before, and God bless you for sending me videos and all of that stuff, but you know what? The chances are things that you send me in my messenger and an email, I've seen them before. This is what I do. I do this with Rocky's show, The Situation Room. I do this with this show. I like to keep abreast of topics going on. Now, I'm not saying I have the rightest, bestest opinion on everything that's out there, but I've seen it all. And my message box and my emails are flooded every day, glutted to the point of being bloated with all kinds of videos and things that are just making the rounds. Be it politics, be it COVID, be it race wars, be it all of this stuff. Now, I'm going to say something about all of this, and I want you all to listen to this. I'm a positive person, and I always have been. I've always been an optimist. I see this as dire as it seems to some people. I don't see this as the end of America. If from my political ideology, if Joe Biden got in, you know what? Somebody asked me, how would you act if Joe Biden got in? Well, I'd probably piss and moan for a little bit, and then I'd say, you know what? He's still the president of the United States, even if it's only in a figurehead. And you respect the office. You respect the person sitting in the office. You don't have to like him. You don't have to think he's the best person for the job, or eventually she. If Biden got in, it would basically be Kamala Harris running the show, I think, from my political ideology. Would that be such a bad thing is what I'm getting at. Maybe for political ideology, yes. Maybe for things going on in this country, yes. Are there things we can do in this country that tear us away from our moorings and make us something that we're not meant to be, or make government something government was never meant to be. Yeah, that goes on. So I look at all that, and getting back to my point about being an optimist, a realist mixed with an optimist, to me, this is all blips on the radar. You know what? This nation is filled with enough people and enough voting power and enough people to help affect their government that there's nothing on either side that's going to destroy us permanently. We get over these blips. We get over these bumps. We equalize. We have a thing here called checks and balances. I can tell you what, if a Joe Biden gets elected to office, I guarantee you the Congress is going to start looking the opposite of Joe Biden. Maybe for a couple of years, but until the next elections. It happens with almost every president. Rarely does a president have the Congress totally on his side of the political spectrum. And so there's checks and balances that are there. We can't do things in this country that are going to permanently ruin us by way of simply political ideology. And what I mean by that, yeah, we can destroy ourselves awfully easily. But I tend to believe in human nature a little bit more than that. I tend to be very positive and say whatever happens with COVID, whatever happens with race wars, whatever race wars, we've been seeing them for 50 years. And we're seeing them over the same issues. What was in the late 1960s? Was it 68? 68, the Watts riots, and I don't remember what year that plugged into, but they were all over the same issues we're hearing today. And then they got resolved. And then it re-emerges. All of this stuff is stuff that's going to rise up, and then it goes away, then it rises up, and it goes away. There are certain levels we're trying to reach. The beautiful thing about this country is that while we may have made mistakes in our history, we are also a nation that corrects its course. We are a nation that offers that to its people. And those of you who are listening that are not from the United States and view it from a European point of view or an Australian point of view or another worldly point of view, you know what? This is the struggle of being a free people. Free people who has a voice and is able to... Now, a lot of the governments out there still have the voice of the people is recognized. I get that. But as a system, we have this in place. A question came up yesterday to me from Niall over in Ireland about, he says, I never really quite got what that Electoral College thing is all about over there for elections. And if you don't know what the Electoral College is about and you're a citizen of this country, you need to go take 20 minutes and read up on that. That information is readily available to you. You could go click on something. I could do it right now. I could say, Electoral College. I type that into my Google search. What is the Electoral College? Is the first thing that comes up. Electoral College Fast Facts, Presidential Election Process, Opinion, the Electoral College will destroy America. Opinion, the Electoral College will save America. What is the U.S. Electoral College, and so on and so on and so on. And so it's really easy. Here, I've got one right here. What's the Electoral College? Let's get off on this for a couple of minutes, since we have a little bit of time. And let me give you this. And this is part of the reason I'm an optimist. These things all exist, and they will continue to exist unless we destroy ourselves first. When Americans cast their vote for the president, they're in reality directing other people, called electors, to vote for the candidate who receives the most votes in their state. Now remember, for those of you out of the country who question the Electoral College, it was built into our Constitution because we are not just one nation, one federal entity. We are a collection of, right now, 50 independent states. And so all of those states need to have a voice in a national election. And the political party of the winning candidate in each state sends its pre-selected electors to the state capitol to vote. Now, this is the Electoral College, and its members elect the President and the Vice President of the United States. So why does this process exist? I wasn't going to get into this tonight, but as long as it's right here in front of my face, why does the Electoral College exist? Why do we have this process? It's because the framers, the founders of this country, the framers of the Constitution, established the Electoral College and the Constitution to forge a compromise between those who wanted the president to be elected by members of Congress and those who wanted a president elected by a popular vote. Today there are 538 electors, and they constitute the Electoral College. And each state is allocated electors equal to its number of representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives. And currently there's a total of 435 members of Congress, plus its 2 senators, a total of 100. And so the District of Columbia is also allocated 3 electors. And these numbers can change every 10 years based on the results of census that are taken. And that's why the census is important. So state laws differ on how electors are to be chosen. And 48 states in the District of Columbia have a winner-take-all policy that the Electoral College is bound to follow. That means that a candidate who wins, say, 51% of the state's popular vote is awarded 100% of the state's electors. So the popular vote in a given state determines the number of electoral votes. It's a representative system. Like I've said, people say, well, that doesn't sound like democracy. Well, it is democracy. The thing that everybody has to remember, which I've repeated a million times, and I'm not exaggerating, is that the United States is not a democracy. We have democracy. We are a constitutionally limited representative republic. And so since the nation's founding, hundreds of proposals to reform or eliminate the Electoral College have aimed to change how Americans elect a president. But since the process is defined in the Constitution, only an amendment to the Constitution can change the Electoral College. And passing a constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 majority vote in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, plus the approval of 3/4 of the states, or a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of state legislatures, which has never happened. And so in March 2020, a study found that a majority of U.S. adults, 58%, were in favor of amending the Constitution. So the presidential candidate who receives the most popular votes nationwide wins, while 40% preferred to keep the current system in which the candidate who receives the most electoral votes wins. And so it never actually made it into law. So when you have just a popular vote, here's the idea behind it. And this is oversimplified, but here's the idea. If you have a popular vote, say, take the city of Los Angeles, California, or take the city of New York, or take the city of Miami. Take just those 3 cities. What if in that urban environment in Los Angeles, they all decided a majority of them were going to vote for one party or the other? Well, let's say one party. Well, what happens if the total population of Los Angeles outvotes the total population of the entire state of Montana? Well, then Montana is not represented in the election. This is why the Electoral College. So in essence, what you would have is Los Angeles and New York, probably those 2 alone, would determine every presidential election. And those would be the only states targeted for campaigning, the only cities targeted, the only cities promises made to, and the rest of the country can go to hell in a handbasket. Why? Because 2 cities determine your elections for you, for President of the United States. Do you want New York City and Los Angeles determining the elections for the entire country? Does that represent, as a representative constitutional government, does that represent us all? No. It It represents the needs of Los Angeles or the sway of Los Angeles and or New York City. So this is, in a nutshell, that's the basic reason we have an electoral college. It's so every state is represented. So the majority of votes in states go to that electoral vote. And that's the way, that's why you can have somebody who doesn't win the entire popular vote still win the electoral vote. And I think it's happened 5 times in our country's history. So that's why it exists. This is so I start looking at things like this. I look at current events. I look at the furor over the Electoral College. We have to eliminate the Electoral College because Hillary Clinton didn't get elected to office. She won the popular vote by a few million votes. Few million, that sounds like a lot. Well, it was less than 1% of the nation was that difference in there. And so because the Electoral College existed, it made the decision for us because we voted, and the Electoral College voted on the basis of what each state voted. And so there you go. You don't have to win the popular vote in order to win the electoral vote because we are a representative form of government. And it's set up to make sure every state is represented in the federal election. That's the way it's done. That's in a nutshell. You can go read more about it, of course, and get more information. But let's wrap this all back down into what I started saying, is I'm very optimistic about my country. Are there a few things that are a little worrisome? Yeah, there's worrisome stuff. But you know what? We get through it. We make it through that. And life goes on. Everything goes on. When in the history of humanity have we annihilated our planet? Hasn't happened yet. Have we annihilated people groups? Yeah. So I'm going to tell you something. Anybody that's out there promoting a war over who wins the election in the presidency of the United States, that is, first of all and foremost, when you boil it all down, that's voter intimidation to start with. We will start a revolution if you vote for it. If this guy gets in office that I know you support, we'll start a revolution. You better have guns. That's voter intimidation. That is not the way a civilized society acts or works. And most of the people claiming that and touting that are people that claim to also be loving and tolerant and civilized. So it's a contradiction. Let's leave that at that. So I'm positive and I have an optimistic outlook. That doesn't mean that I'm not realistic and notice that there are things that need attending to, problems that need fixing. I don't think it's just a race war issue. I don't think it's just a COVID-19 pandemic issue, especially when you look at all the numbers and you look at everything out there. So you know what, everybody, calm the hell down. Be civilized, act civilized, vote your conscience, and move forward. That's what I see, and that's all I like to address politics. Sometimes I'll get into the meat. It gets unsavory after a while, because sometimes you have to support things on a political level that might go a little bit against your grain, because the overall package is better than the opposite package. You know what I mean by that? That doesn't mean I don't vote necessarily for Donald Trump because I respect him as this wonderful shining beacon of humanity. What I do vote for him for is because I believe in his overall political agenda. And you could say the same thing about a Biden. Biden I have more problem with because I think the left in this country is elevating Biden as anything other than Trump. That's a bad way to put somebody in office. And they had so many other choices that could be made. Why didn't the left, if Kamala Harris is now the vice president, the vice president on the ticket with Biden, why didn't they just put her up for president? Because the left at the time didn't believe she could make it. They didn't support her as president. But now they support her as vice president, the person who's probably going to take over when Joe Biden can't do it. So you look at these things and you go, there's insincerity out there. Put up somebody good. There were good people on the Democratic ticket for candidates. But they didn't. They somehow, did you notice all in one day, this last spring, everybody shifted over on the left. All the political candidates started dropping out and putting their support behind Joe Biden. Somebody got to somebody. It's the inner workings behind politics. Put up a good person. You know, there were Democratic candidates I could have voted for. Anyway, I digress because I'm not really making a point with that other than to say, be careful. Watch what the party is doing if you're voting party. I don't vote just party. I've had a lot of people call me a Republican or a GOPer. And you know what? I'm neither one. I am conservative, but I'm not a Republican. I would vote Democrat if the candidate was better than the candidate being voted on the other side. It's that simple. And if you use that mentality, you're going to get better people in office. So I happen to believe that the current president should stay in office another 4 years. And I believe he's doing good things, whether or not you believe he's a good person. And again, I use that old example of Thomas Becket, who was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury against his wishes by King Henry II. And Henry wanted his old carousing friend to be the Archbishop so he could control the church. Well, once Becket got into office, he gave up his old days, and he became the Archbishop of Canterbury. For what you care about that or not, from a religious point of view. And Henry eventually had him assassinated, because his old friend stood against him. He became the man. I see this as Trump. You may not like everything about his past or everything he was, but you know what? He is who he is now. And sometimes your past counts. Sometimes your past is something you say, look, I have a past. All right? Did things in my past. People keep bringing up, grabbing the pussy or sleeping with a porn star. You know what? He did those things. He said those things. But it's not an apologetic about Trump. It's just it's a way to look at how people start to determine what's good and what's bad. If that's all you got is what a guy did 20 years ago, you know what, and has reformed from and has admitted and has moved on, is trying to do better, working at being better. If that's all you got is to look at somebody's past, you know what? All the people who uphold the writings of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, he was also a murderer. He was also somebody who was killing Christians at one time. Should they have gauged him by that? Maybe. Maybe not. So let's move on from that. Again, I'm digressing, and I'm wrapping into things I don't really want to talk about today. But we're at the end of my rambling. Is it the Folks, we're back. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come and watch the video simulcast and join the live chat room going on right now over at my YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, let's jump into this because I used up all the first hour rambling about things I don't like to talk about so much on this channel. So I hope you got something out of that, and you can take some of the things I said and throw out the stuff you don't like. But let's move on into talking about Samson. Now, we all know a little bit about Samson. Well, most of us do. If you went to Sunday school at all or churchified when you were a kid, you heard the stories of Samson. Samson, the great judge of Israel. He was, and this is pre-monarchy. This is before there was a kingship. This is before the time of Solomon and David and Saul. This is before that time. It's kind of that inter-period between the Exodus and settling in Israel and the beginning of the Israelite monarchy. And so the judges were all these different characters that were raised up to be not kings, but what was the difference between a judge and a king? Not a whole lot, except the judge couldn't rule over your life. They were appointed to be protectors of Israel, as it were. And it was deeply tied into the Jewish religion as well. And so you had all these judges. And the last of these judges was a man named Samson. You're going to find his story in the Old Testament book of Judges, chapters 13 through 16. And it's a short story, but it was an effective story, and it's one that stuck with us because of the romanticized versions of the story. And for 40 long and bitter years with few intermissions, the Jews had been feeling the crushing weight of Philistine oppression. Their nearest neighbors, and that were always battling to own their territory, and they were oppressed by them. They weren't able to win a decisive victory over their foes. And the Philistines were the whip with which God Almighty was punishing the Jews for their disloyalty to him. And you can see the religious trappings are all through this story. And this story is all about God raising up a judge to push back the Philistines. But God also said in the Old Testament scriptures that the Philistines were a finger of his righteousness. Well, what the hell did that mean? Since they were always the symbol of oppression against the Jews. It means that God used the Philistines to get the attention of his people. This is on a theological level now, so there's no common sense to that other than to say this is what the Jews believed their deity God did. And he raised up the Philistines and made the Philistines oppress them to get their attention and bring them back to God. And there was this constant cycle in the Old Testament. And so I'm going to pull a little bit of information. You can go look at some of this from, it's not that I don't know the story, I just wanted to see it from a Jewish point of view. You can go to Chabad, I think is the way it's pronounced, Chabad, like Chabad, Chabad.org, and it's a site of a Jewish voice. It's for looking at Jewish practice, Jewish learning and values, their community and family, inspiration and entertainment, and so on. It's kind of a life magazine for the Jews. And so I'm pulling some information from this. This is their point of view, and it's very steeped in the religious side of things as well. So there was let's go all the way back to the birth of Samson. There was a day when Zelphanis, a Jewish woman, was walking in a field, and a very wonderful thing happened to her. An angel of heaven appeared before her and said, "You're going to bear a son who will someday rescue the Jewish people from their enemies. He's going to be an extraordinary person, stronger than a lion, fleeter than a deer, and his spirit's going to be free and fearless. And you have to remember that his life will be consecrated to the service of God. Therefore, never cut his hair. Give him no wines or liquors, but nourish him with the purest and mildest food, for he shall be a Nazirite. And there was this Nazirite vow, somebody who dedicates themselves to God and thereby gives up lots of different things, one of them being cutting their hair. It was supposed to be a symbol of their dedication. Not that there was anything magical about the hair. It's just I don't cut my hair or my beard as I get older because it's an outward show of my dedication to God. So Zelphanus, I guess you pronounce it, was overcome with joy. And notice these miraculous angelic appearances. Are those added, or did those things actually happen? Did every charismatic leader of Israel have an angelic presence announce them to their pre-impregnated mothers? So his mom was all overcome with joy because she'd longed for a child for years, but she'd been childless. And now her great desire was to be fulfilled. And not only that, with this great consecrated child. And she hastened to tell the joyful news to her husband, Manoah, and the two rejoiced together. And when she gave birth to the son, she called him Samson, Shimshon, or Shimson in Hebrew, from the word Shemesh, or the sun. She felt that Shimshon was destined to be bright and mighty as the sun, and she'd deliver the Jewish people from those awful Philistines who were oppressing them. And so even in his early youth, Samson revealed remarkable physical strength. One day he was wandering in the woods when suddenly came face to face with a ferocious lion. The lion charged him, but Samson, undaunted, slew the lion with his bare hands as though it were a kitten. Now, of course, you got to start thinking, there's lions in Israel? There aren't any more today. So I don't know what kind of lion this was, or if it was part of a story. So as Samson grew to manhood, he began to resent more and more the oppression of his people by the neighboring Philistines. But he was too modest, too humble to undertake the leadership of a Jewish army. And he decided that he would avenge himself upon the Philistines by engaging them in personal conflicts and intimidating them so that they'd no longer molest his brethren. So he was acting the part of a guerrilla, of a William Wallace type, rising up, except the Philistines didn't have rule over them, they just oppressed them. And so he began to seek ways of getting into a closer grip with the enemy, and it was necessary for him to win their confidence and at the same time to find good excuses for personal vendetta with them. So Samson met a woman in the Philistine town of Timnah who was ready to accept the Jewish faith and be his wife. And at the wedding feast were gathered the young men of the town who had come to take part in the wedding festivities, and Samson now had an opportunity to put his plan into practice. And he addressed the whole company, saying, "I'm going to ask you a riddle, and if you can solve it, I'll give each of you a suit of clothing. But if you don't guess the riddle, then each of you will have to give me a suit of clothing." And the Philistines were only too glad to accept this challenge, and he asked them this riddle: "Out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. What is it?" And so when Samson presented the riddle, not one of them could find a solution. They appealed to Samson's wife to coax the answer from her husband. "Are you not one of us? Will you let your countrymen be defeated and humiliated by a Hebrew? If you don't find the answer for us, we'll burn your father's house," they threatened. Nobody wanted to buy Samson a new set of clothes. So Samson's wife began to press him hard to tell her the answer to the riddle, and Samson finally gave in. Who knows? She probably held sex over. You wanna have any of this? You wanna get this? You're gonna tell me the riddle. And he told her the story that led to form the riddle. He said, "When I was young, going into Timnah for the first time, a young lion roared against me in the vineyard near the town. I grabbed the lion by his jaws and rent him in two with the greatest of ease, because he had all this magical power. Now, when I was coming here to marry you, I remembered the lion and decided to have a look at the carcass. I found a bee comb in it, honeycomb, and I took a handful of honey from it. It was the sweetest honey I ever tasted. Now you know why I put forth such a riddle to the Philistines. Now it was interesting. He said when he was going to Timnah for the first time, a young lion roared against me when he was in his youth, and now he's getting married, and he stumbles upon the carcass. Wow, that's carcass has been sitting there for a long time. So anyway, on the 70th day of the feast, just before sunset, when the time for the solving of the riddle was due to expire, the Philistines came to Samson and said, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And so Samson realized at once he'd been betrayed by his wife. And he left the city in a terrible anger. Going to Ashkelon, another town in Philistia, he avenged himself by killing 30 wicked Philistines there, and then he sent their robes to the men who had won the wager, albeit dishonestly. So, what do you got here? You got a guy who lost a bet, and he went out and killed 30 other guys to take their clothes and give them to these other guys who won the bet dishonestly. Wow, in his anger. But he was still God's judge over Israel. Returning to Timnah with the present for his wife, Samson found that her father had made her wed another man while Samson was gone. I don't know how long he was gone, or if he killed these 30 men, he was a serial killer. I don't think he did it all in one group, but he killed 30 guys and sent their clothes to these people. How long was he gone that his father-in-law married her to another guy? So Samson became very angry, for not one Philistine protested against the scandalous act. And Samson caught 300 foxes, and he tied their tails and put flame torches between each pair of tails. And leading the foxes into the Philistine cornfield, Samson started a terrible conflagration that destroyed the Philistine crops. And in addition to avenging his own grievance, this was to teach the Philistines a lesson for their frequent pillaging of the land of Israel. So he's pissed off, he kills people, he sets all their crops on fire, and that's for attacking Israel too. So the Philistines immediately tried to mollify Samson's anger by burning the house of his unfaithful wife and her father's house. They alone were responsible for arousing Samson's fury, they said. But when Samson heard of this belated news, this penitence of the Philistines, he said, "It's too late now for you to defend my honor. Now I'm going to have my revenge." So here is a judge of Israel wreaking havoc on the Philistines, all out of personal revenge. And Samson, yeah. And it's also because you're oppressing God's people. And Samson alone, with only his great divine strength to help him, fought the Philistines, defeated them in many single-handed combats, and he went to live among the rocks of Etam. And Samson's attacks on the Philistines greatly aroused their wrath, as you can imagine. And with a mighty army, the Philistines went up to Judah and camped there by the town of Lehi. And the Philistines sent a message to Judah: "If you surrender Samson to us, we'll leave you to dwell in peace. But if you don't comply with our request, we'll lay waste to your entire land." So you can see how the actions of one guy are inciting a national war. Now, you can imagine what an effect these words had on the tribesmen of Judah when they saw the great array of arms and the powerful army of the Philistines mounted up against them. So the men of Judah went to Samson. "Samson," they said, "the Philistines are going to slay us all. They're going to burn our homes. They're going to take our wives and our children captive if we don't deliver you. They're standing this very minute at the gates of Judah." "Very well," replied Samson, "bind me, but promise that you will not harm me." They assured Samson they would surrender him to the Philistines unharmed. Then Samson permitted them to bind him. Fast they bound him with new strong ropes, and with a prayer in their hearts for his deliverance, they brought him before the Philistines. So they kind of like, "Can we please just take you in?" And he's like, "Okay, just bind me with new ropes." And a shout of joy arose from the Philistine camp when they saw, I don't think it was joy, it was probably, we got him. And they saw their dangerous enemy Samson bound with heavy ropes and utterly at their mercy. But at the moment that Samson felt the Spirit of God that bestowed upon him supernatural strength, and the heavy ropes that held his hands and arms so fast became as light as the finest thread, and with the greatest of ease he snapped them and freed his hands from the bonds. And a terrible wrath and fearful might stirred in him, and tearing out of the battlefield he destroyed 1,000 Philistine warriors, single-handedly, with nothing but a fresh jawbone of an ass, which he had picked up, and the Philistines fled in disorder. So one guy now killed 1,000 people with the jawbone of a donkey. And if you don't think that's a little exaggerated, that story, I got some land for you somewhere near a swamp. Now, after this spectacular victory, the Jews realized that Samson was chosen by God to lead them, and they appointed him as a judge. And so he was the 13th judge in Israel since Joshua's days. So Samson never ceased to perform his breathtaking feats for which he became famed. One day when he was in Gaza, the Philistines were informed of his presence, and surrounding the town, they quietly waited for sunrise when he would go on his way. Then they would attack and slay him. But Samson had heard of the Philistines surrounded the town, and he didn't wait for morning to come. In the black of night he left the house, and coming to the gates of the city, he found them locked. And with remarkable ease, he tore the gates and the posts away, bar and all, and carried them on his shoulders all the way to Hebron in Judah. And this is an amazing feat from an amazing man. And now we come to the Samson and Delilah story, the romantic part of the story, the Victor Mature, Hedy Lamarr part of the story. Now, Samson married again a Philistine woman. Again, he marries a Philistine woman, and called Delilah. And after she became a Jewess. And the Philistine lords came to Delilah one day and said to her, "Delilah, you must find out what the secret of your husband's great strength is." Now, everybody seemed to know this story of Samson, but the Philistines didn't. "And if you'll obtain the secret of his strength from him, we'll reward you well. You'll be rich. You'll have everything your heart desires." And Delilah, she just couldn't resist this offer of wealth. And so this heartless creature agreed. That's the way it's written in their story. She agreed to sell her husband's life for some silver pieces. But now the question remained, how to wheedle the truth out of Samson. Delilah was an artful creature, and she would find a way. She was a crafty woman. And with all the wiles and guile she possessed, this green-eyed, spittin' female cruelly and tenaciously tormented Samson with the question, "What's the secret of your power?" Until he could stand it no longer, she nagged the shit out of him. "And if you bind me with 7 new ropes that were never used, then I'm stronger than the ordinary man," Samson told her. "Then I'm no stronger." And Delilah told the secret to the Philistine lords. They brought her 7 fresh cords that hadn't been used, and saying she wished to see if he told her the truth, Delilah persuaded Samson to let her be bound, being unaware that the Philistine lords lay waiting to pounce upon him in Delilah's chamber. Then she cried to him, "Samson, the Philistines are here!" And at those words he broke the ropes with no trouble at all, as though they were mere cobwebs. And Delilah was not discouraged, though. Oh, no. "Oh, Samson," she cried tearfully, "you have deceived me. All your vows of affection were but a mockery and an untruth. Come, tell me wherein really lies the secret of your strength." Again and again Samson deceived her with all these false clues about the mystery of his strength. However, Delilah did not relent in her efforts to entice him to give her the secret. Finally, Samson could no longer bear her constant prying and told her the secret of his strength. "Since my birth, I have never cut my hair, for I'm a Nazirite. If my hair is cut, I lose my strength, for God will not be with me any longer." It's amazing how God can be with you, but if you cut your hair, if you break your vow, God's gone, according to Samson. So the treacherous Delilah knew that Samson was telling her the truth this time, and she hastened to summon the Philistine lords to her house. When Samson's asleep, one of the men cut his locks away, and then Delilah cried, "Samson, the Philistines are here!" Samson jumped up and prepared to defend himself, but the divine protection that had endowed him with such extraordinary strength before had departed from him. And the men who lay in wait for Samson easily overcame him. And these heartless Philistines gouged out his eyes and led him to Gaza in iron chains. Now the Philistines made a great feast to celebrate their victory over Samson. They gathered in the great hall in Gaza. They sang and they danced and gave thanks to their god Dagon for delivering Samson into their hands. And then they sent for the blind Samson so that he might amuse him. By the way, they had him grinding grain, chained to a treadmill or a wheel, a grinding wheel, and grinding grain. So they sent for him. And they brought him in so that he might amuse them. They were going to mock him in front of the crowds. And so tormented and cruelly humiliated, he could not bear the rude jests in their idol worship. And turning to his guide, he said, "Lead me to the pillars so that I may lean upon them and rest for a minute." And the boy obeyed. So Samson, afire with anger and pain, invoked the Lord. "O God," he said, "give me strength this once. Let me avenge myself on these cruel Philistines." Again, vengeance being his motivator, that they may know that you are the only God. And it matters not if I die with them. So once again he felt the Spirit of God in him. With one mighty heave, Samson tore the pillars down. And the next instant the walls and the roof came crashing in, and not a single Philistine present survived. And Samson, too, was killed in the great crash. And later his remains were brought to his native land, and he was interred in the soil he had fought so valiantly to defend. And Samson had been the acknowledged judge of the people of Israel for about 20 years. Now, it took a while to get through that story. That reads like a story. You know why? Because I think a lot of it is a story. A lot of it is embellishment. Was there a man named Samson who actually existed? I know yesterday I mentioned, or 2 days ago, mentioned that there was some archaeological evidence that bore us to the time of Samson, that bore a likeness of the image of a man with long hair killing a lion. Was that Samson? Was that taken out of their own stories and their own mythology, their own legends? So that's the story as we see it. And now Samson was supposed to be this judge, this mighty man of God that was defending Israel, yet we see almost every time he killed the oppressing Philistines, he was doing it out of vengeance. They're making fun of me in his last thing, and vengeance, take me to the main pillars so that I can lean on them. And but even in the Bible account, by the way, it says that he did the grain, and he did this, and he was blinded, and they made fun of him and all. It says, albeit his hair began to grow. So his hair was growing back. So this made this less about his dedication to God and not cutting his hair, and more about his hair actually growing again. Was the magic in the hair? No. So whether you grew up in Sunday school or not, or Christian church, chances are you've heard this story before. But how recently, if ever, have you read the story of Samson? Go read this in the biblical text. Won't take you very long, 15 minutes maybe at most. Chapters 13 through 16 of the book of Judges. And there's some things that you need to look at about Samson's life. And there was a new movie that came out a few years ago about Samson. And they told this story. And again, I don't think they did a very good job. That's just me and history in the movies and theology and all that. But there's 7 things about Samson. Samson's dad had major debt issues. The angel of the Lord who came and visited Samson's mom, informing her she would bear a son and how to raise him. He'd be a Nazirite. Her husband had such a hard time hearing this news from her, he prayed to God and asked him to send the angel again so he could hear the instructions for himself. And according to the story, God actually did send the angel again. And after the angel refused to eat any food they offered, Samson's parents offered a burnt offering to the Lord as an alternative to preparing a meal for the angel. And after the angel left them by ascending into heaven and rising in flames, Samson's father thought they had seen God and were therefore doomed to die. And his wife had to talk some sense back into him. If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and grain, and nor shown us all these things, nor told us all this stuff again. And I wouldn't become pregnant. So number two, about Samson you've never thought about. Number two, God actually condoned Samson's first marriage to the Philistine woman. In Judges 14, Samson declares his desire to take this young Philistine girl as his wife, despite his parents urging him to reconsider. The Bible actually goes on to say that his parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. So this was God's plan. God's plan that Samson would marry a Philistine woman so Samson would have the opportunity to confront them and kill them. There you go. God of the Bible. Samson took riddles way too seriously, and we saw this whole gambling debt thing he did. And he, of course, went out and killed 30 guys to honor the bet. And even more interesting to consider is that the Bible says the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him as he went down to strike down these 30 guys to steal their clothes and pay off his debt of gambling. It would appear that even though Samson was killing them for seeming trivial reasons, that God gave him strength to do it. This is the God of the Old Testament. 4, Samson took wedding drama to a whole new level. Even to make it crazier, it says Samson's wife was given by her father to another guy, to one of his companions who attended him at the feast. Then Samson went to visit his wife, apparently remained in Israel, and she was the Philistines even after the wedding, and her father informed him that he'd given her in marriage, and he tries to convince Samson to take her younger sister. Here, take her younger sister instead. He even throws Samson's original wife under the bus by saying her sister is more attractive anyway. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead, he says. So Samson gets really pissed off, and he goes out and he catches 300 foxes, and he sets fire to their tails and sends them and sets all the Philistine crops on fire in that area. Not to be outdone, the Philistines learned Samson was responsible for this, and they went and burned his father-in-law and his wife to death. It's no surprise that the same person who... And I think that's an apologetic. I think that's a reason to establish why the Philistines were even more evil and needed a Samson to wipe them out. Then Samson slaughtered many of them, stemming from the wedding drama. Then 5, Judah betrayed Samson. His own people turned him over. Don't be pissed at us, and we won't kill you in the process. But Samson was, in a sense, the original Trojan horse, at least in the Old Testament. The people of Judah gave him up, and once he was inside Philistia, he broke the bonds, of course, and killed 1,000 of them. 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. So keep in mind the men of Judah who delivered Samson to Philistia weren't in on this. They thought they were really turning him over to his execution. They probably didn't expect him to come back home for dinner with blood on his hands. So between his tragic marriage and his time with Delilah, Samson went to a prostitute. It's number 6. We all remember how at one point Samson's story tore the doors off the gates of the city of Gaza. But did you know why he was in Gaza in the first place? According to Judges 16:1, that he went there, and whatever his initial intentions were, he ended up stooping a prostitute instead. You don't really hear about that part of the story, but usually skip right to the next part. And after the Gazites realized he was there, they planned to kill him at daybreak, and he tore off the gates of the city and walked away from him, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now, number 7 of these things, Samson's patience with riddles didn't carry over into more important secrets. The Bible says that when Samson started seeing a Philistine woman named Delilah. She taunted him. He married her, and she nagged him and nagged him and nagged him. And unlike not giving up the secret to his riddle, so he'd have to pay guys 30 outfits, he finally gives in to her. And she cut his hair, and the Philistines captured him in the end. God gives him his strength back for one last time, allowing Samson to topple a large Philistine temple onto 3,000 Philistines, a feat that took the life of Samuel himself, as the Bible says. And it ends the story of Samson saying, "Thus Samson killed many more when he died than while he lived." Did you learn anything about this guy? That's who Samson was, and sadly we're out of time. Can't do a whole lot of commentary on that, but I think you get it as we went along. So, folks, be back tomorrow, 23 hours. Maybe we'll give you a little bit more on Samson, but we got a new topic for tomorrow. Sit tight. See you in 20.